Hello, Gabrielle. Good to have you for
Hello.
this special episode.
It's
Hi,
very good to be
Gabrielle.
here. Hi, Emma.
So, Ev and I had this idea of trying something a little bit different. I personally listen to a lot of long form podcasts, and I really love how in depth they are, which is kind of different from what we do usually on the school, which is 30 minutes, rapid fire, get as much out of it as we can. And you agreed to be our first guest for this new format. And I will start by saying that I always knew that you were pretty exceptional individual, but the more I did research for this episode, the more I was blown away by your vita. Like, it's honestly, there's so much we can talk about, and I'm sure the time will not be enough because we could get lost on a million rabbit holes with you. So yeah, maybe one thing that I'd love to do, because it's the one thing that I couldn't find anything on when I did my research, was understanding where your love for nature comes from.
Huh. So, if I could turn around the camera now, this is my desk, this is my backdrop. But if you looked around there, you'd see I have a wall of trees in my room. So I have floor to ceiling glass windows for something like 10 meters, and there's just trees and plants all the way through. And I sort of need to look at that all day, or I can't do the rest of it. So, the story is. There's two stories that my mum told me about where this love of nature might come from. One of them is that apparently when I was about 3, she lost me in the garden and was very worried. She was racing around the place trying to find me, and eventually she noticed 2 little feet sticking out from under the shed. So she hauled me out, and I got my clothes all messy. So she's like, "What were you doing under there?" And the answer was, I was looking at the mini beasts. I was looking at the mini
What?
beasts. At the mini beasts. The mini
What's that?
beasts. That's what I said, age 3. So any of the tiny creatures, the bugs and the all the creatures that were under the shed, and that was the best place to find them. There's another story that not long after that, they tried to take us all out on a family picnic, and someone said, "Where's Gabrielle?" as we were all spilling out of the car, and I disappeared. And they saw me running down the hill and halfway back up the little slide, my little legs pumping, trying to get into the woods before they could stop me and bring me back. So, yes, sympathy for my mother, definitely. But really, as a child, we walked everywhere all the time. We used to walk all the way around in nature. We walked for miles. We used to walk back from school. We used to walk across the fields. We lived in the countryside. And I think I really learned it, especially from my mum. Just a real delight in nature. We had a nature table at home, and we'd find different things in different parts of the season. We'd bring them home, we'd label them, we'd take them into school and tell people about them. So there was a really kind of, from a very early age, there was a really visceral engagement. And one thing that stuck with me, so there was a bluebell wood at the end of the road. Now, this thing happens, this extraordinary thing happens in the UK, which is every April, May, these bluebells come, and they come out of nowhere into beautiful beech woods, and they carpet everything with this incredible carpet of purple flowers. And when you go there, you can see them slanting, and the slanting sun shaping them, and then they disappear. And it happens every year. So we had a bluebell wood at the end of our road, and we used to go and play in it, my brother and I and our friends. And ever since then, the bluebells have been a really important part of my year. So this last Saturday, when things were getting difficult in the carbon removal space, I think, what do I need? So this last Saturday, I got up at 4:30. I drove out of London to Hertfordshire, to a one special place where I know there are bluebells. I sat on a log with a flask, and I listened to the dawn chorus, the most extraordinary orchestra you will ever hear in your life, of the dawn chorus in the spring in the UK. Incredible, as all of the migrating birds come in and the rest of them start singing for their territory and their nests. And then I watched the sun come up and slant across the bluebells.
That's beautiful.
And then I was okay again, and then I came home. So for me, there's a love of nature, but in a way I feel so integrated. It's like my mood, my attention, the reasons I'm doing this, the privilege of being able to be in wild places and really feel what it's like to be there and to encounter animals and plants there. It feels like it's been a fundamentally important thread in everything that I've ever done.
Wow. It's that instinct of kind of running to woods, running to nature. I guess that's a thread throughout your life, huh?
And I take people to the bluebells. My favorite people. That's my happy place. The bluebells in the spring. That's my happy place.
following up on the childhood, so the love of nature, we heard about it. Was there also a little scientist that kind of came out in certain situations?
Well, I should have been a biologist, because that was, I collected the mini beasts. I put them in jars. I then released them so that they wouldn't die in the jars. I tried to figure out what to feed them. I collected, tadpoles and let them turn into frogs and then release them again. Or, watching how they changed, watching what happened to the buds and watching what happened to the animals as well. So I guess, I didn't do experiments on animals when I was a kid, but I did study them very intently. I was so curious about how they worked and how they were different and how they were the same. I was never afraid of spiders. I was a spider rescuer. When everyone else was screaming, I would go and pick the poor thing up and carefully carry it outside. I'm a very big fan of spiders because mosquitoes eat me to death, and so they're mosquito killers, so they're my friends. So I don't know whether that's a kind of little scientist. In a sense, you can characterize science as being what? So there's several things. It's like an experimenter, a willingness to be wrong so that you can learn. So that's the kind of scientific method. It's like you find a hypothesis and you try to prove it wrong. So a willingness to be wrong on the principle that then you learn something. Experimentation, and then also intense curiosity. And I love cooking and I love making cocktails. My PhD was in chemistry, and I didn't make the connection for years. But cocktails and cooking are all chemistry. Last night I made myself some fresh prawns with stir fry, and it's one of my favorite things. You watch them go from grey to pink as you're cooking them, and it's like magic. So I think that there's chemistry in all of this, and I've loved doing that, cooking from the beginning. I've loved I didn't love cocktails when I was a kid, but that was more of an adult taste. But so I think curiosity and experimentation, and also the vital importance of doubt. This is something I've long wanted to write a book about, the benefit of the doubt. We have this expression, the benefit of the doubt, meaning giving someone the benefit of the doubt, not assuming that they're trying to do something mean to you or horrible to you. But I think doubt has immense benefit. If in every field that I've ever worked in, the only time I'm 100% sure I'm wrong is when I'm 100% sure I'm right. And so that the porous, the openness to maybe there's a different way to see this, maybe there's a different way to think, is actually a route to much more interesting ideas and much more learning. So I've always had those three drives, really: experiment, be curious, and wonder if something might be different.
When did you decide to make this a career, to go down this route, not just as a passion? Science.
Yeah.
To make this a career.
So the funny thing is, I would never have described myself as a scientist. I tried to stop doing chemistry in school because I didn't like it very much. I like physics and I like biology, but I found chemistry just learning lots of facts, so I tried to drop it. And my careers teacher forced me to do it very reluctantly. So years later, when I did a PhD in chemistry, I went back to see her and said, "You were right." So I didn't see myself as a scientist, but I did see myself as intensely curious, because I loved languages, I loved music, I loved history, I loved writing and storytelling above all. And I heard stories in music, I found stories in history, I found stories in literature and in languages, and so it was more like looking for stories that was my driving force. But in the UK education system, especially at the time, at the age of 16, you have to decide, are you going to be humanities or science? And so I wanted both, but I was told very forcefully that if I tried to study both, I'd really get neither, and I wouldn't have the right basis to be able to go to university and study one of them and so on. So what I did was I studied only science for my A-levels, because on the principle that if I dropped science, I couldn't get it back. So I could still read, I could still learn languages, I could still play music, I could still read about history, but if I stopped doing science, I couldn't have it back again. So I did that for A-levels. But then I lucked my way onto a program in the US at a liberal arts college, which was just for a year. It's called an International Student Certificate or something, a diploma, where I just went to a liberal arts college in the US and did nothing but humanities. So I did philosophy, and I did history, and I did music, and I did all of those things as much as I could, like a kid in a candy store. And then I came back to Cambridge. The reason I applied to Cambridge above all was that it was the only university in the country that didn't say you have to do chemistry or physics or maths or biology. You did natural sciences, and everybody had to do a combination of subjects at the beginning and then gradually specialize. And even there was some history and philosophy of science. And so I suppose you might say that my academic career was a bit like a game of musical chairs. You know, the game where you play music and so you take away one chair, and when the music stops, whoever doesn't have a chair has to leave. But I wanted all the subjects. I'd lie on all the chairs, and then they'd pull one away, and I'd lie on all the ones that were rest, and then they'd pull one away. But I always wanted to do the combination. So when I was doing my PhD, I did the broadest possible PhD that incorporated different aspects of science, that incorporated some engineering, that incorporated some theory and practice. And at the end of it, I'd always assumed I was going to be an academic because academics get paid to ask questions. Instead of saying, stop asking so many questions, it's actually your job. What could be better? Follow your curiosity. But I suppose in the process of doing all this, doing my PhD, I realized that everybody was saying to me, now you need to specialize. Now you need to go deep.
Mm-hmm.
Just one thing. And as far as I was concerned then, all of the magic was in the boundaries. It's always where things join and connect that you find the things that are special and different. Now we call it systemic thinking, but we didn't have a word for it then. But it's just that's where my mind always went. That's where my heart always went. And so I quit. But then I had to figure out, well, how do I keep following my curiosity and have both the science and the storytelling? And that's where I stumbled across climate change. And it was purely by accident, because I was looking for a way to combine my love of storytelling with my love of science. And Nature magazine had a role for a physical scientist to be the editor for something called climate change.
When was this?
That was back in the 1990s.
Yeah, I was very tiny.
That's
then.
how long I've been at this. That's how long I've been at this. That's why all the grey hairs.
And, don't worry, I've got loads too.
It wasn't really a thing. I had no idea what it was, but I talked my way into Nature because I thought this is a fantastic way to combine science journalism. How brilliant. I can tell stories and I can do the science. And so it just happened to be for climate change. It could have been for anything. But when I got there, I found in climate change, this combination, it's like, if you don't understand all of it, you don't understand any of it. The climate science, it's the atmosphere, it's the oceans, it's the biosphere, it's the rocks, it's the past, it's the future, it's the modelling, it's the theory, and it's how they all interact that combines to give us this issue, these changes. And so I found that my way of thinking suddenly matched this incredibly exciting new field, and I became hooked.
Was it then, or was there at some point before when you felt like you could actually potentially change something big in the world? With all the skills that you...
It was all following, it was all the curiosity, it was all the, how fascinating. But I moved from Nature to New Scientist, where I was features editor, and then I covered astronomy. I stayed overnight in sort of mountaintops with astronomers and their fantastic huge telescopes, and I learned about black holes, and I covered geology and earthquakes and volcanoes. It's fantastic, all this stuff, how the world works, how it all fits together. But there was always this underlying kind of climate change happening more. How do I address it? Increasingly, I realized that the features that I commissioned for myself were on that topic. And then finally I did a series for the BBC. I started doing radio, television, writing books. There's some of them up there. So writing books, writing magazine articles, and all of my books had something about climate and nature and how the world works. And then I was doing a radio series for Radio 4. It was the Bristol Natural History Unit, the BBC Natural History Unit. It was called Planet Earth Under Threat. So it was, let's go around the world and look for evidence that climate change might be starting to affect the natural world. I think this was about 2007. So still early days. And we went around the world looking for places that climate was affecting the natural world. And you know what? It was everywhere. It was absolutely everywhere. It was not subtle. And up to that point, I'd been writing about it, thinking, well, if I write about it, I'm doing good, right? It helps. And I realized it wasn't helping. It wasn't changing things. And one guy I worked with years later, he said to me, sometimes things start in your head. That's exciting, which is what happened with me. And then it might go to your heart. Whoa, this is fun. And then some things go from your heart to your gut. And if they go to your gut, it starts to bother you and to nag at you. And that's what happened through this radio series. And he said to me, if you're really unlucky, some things go from your gut into your soul. And when they're in your soul, there's no power on God's green earth that will get them out. You are stuck with them. You have to do something. And that's when that happened, really.
I'm glad it happened. And maybe because we're kind of in that phase of your life, we need to talk about ice. We need to talk about Antarctica. And so I had, honestly, this is something I didn't know about you. I had no idea just how much time you have spent on the poles. So where did that come from? Because you went back many times.
I don't tend to do things by halves. As most people who work in the carbon removal space, we wouldn't be in this if we gave up easily, and we wouldn't be in this if we didn't get carried away with trying to make something happen. So this is another manifestation of that. So I when I was working at Nature, I discovered that it's possible for people to go to Antarctica. I hadn't really registered that, but the Antarctica is a fascinating continent because it's basically, it's an entire continent dedicated to peace and science. You're not allowed to do war there. You're not allowed to have military there unless they're supporting the scientists. You're not allowed to colonize it, and nobody's allowed to own any of it. This is a treaty that's been solid for 50 plus years. I think I need to check the number, but yeah, I think it was just renewed. But the Antarctic Treaty, which was originally signed by a small group of countries, and there's more than 50 countries that are operating in Antarctica. Everybody subscribes to the same thing, and so you can go there as a tourist to different parts of it, but it's expensive even to get to the fringes, and to get into the heart of it is borderline impossible. But if you go with a scientist, you can go anywhere. And so when I discovered this, I started trying to figure out how I could go with a scientist. Obviously,
what drew you to it? What drew you? Because most people are not necessarily drawn to like minus 40 degrees scientific basis 50, in the middle of Antarctica.
In the summer. Yes, I was there in the spring. I was at the South Pole for a month in the spring when it was minus 50. So, and that's material. But, the thing is, you can get minus 50 in Siberia or in Canada. You can find, I've also been, and I love the Arctic, but the Arctic feels like a dramatic version of Earth. And Antarctica feels like space. So there is no human history until we met Antarctica for the first time a couple of centuries ago. Humans cannot live there. Humans have never lived there. The only way to live there is to take your entire life support with you. If you live on the fringes, you can live on the sea, live from the sea, so you can get the seafood and you can get the shelter. But in the interior, there is nothing but ice. Nothing. There's nothing to make shelter. There's no way to make water. There's no food. There's nothing. You have to take everything with you. So it is the closest you can get to walking on another planet and still be on Earth. And that's what drew me, the idea. I mean, if I can't go to Mars, then I could go to Antarctica. And literally, there are some parts of Antarctica, they're called the dry valleys, which are extremely cold. Nothing ever changes. It hasn't rained there for millions of years. The ice is dammed by some mountains at the front, so it doesn't flow into them. And when I went to visit, there are scientists from NASA who go there and wander around, picturing it to try to understand and interpret the images that they get from Mars. And they're also, there's plenty of times in the South Pole in the winter when the planes can't get in, you are farther from rescue than you are if you're in the International Space Station.
That's crazy.
In the International Space Station, they can get you down within a day or two. But in Antarctica and the South Pole in the midwinter, there have been some very daring, dramatic medivacs with very dramatic reasons. But if the whole station went up in flames, you'd be...
You were there. You did a winter there, right?
I have never done a winter there. I would love to, but it's a really long commitment. Basically, you've got to be... I was there, the longest I was there, I went back many times in different forms, and the longest I was there was for 5 months through the summer. So I went to the South Pole on one of the first planes after the winter was over. So that was when it was minus 50. And then for about a week, the weather was too bad for any more planes to get in. So I kind of got a feeling for it. And I spoke to all the people who'd just spent the winter over, many of whom were, they call it being toast, or people being toasty. Being toast is you're talking to them and they just get this 1,000-mile stare. And you go, hello. So it sends everybody a little bit crazy in a different way. But everything about that was fascinating. So the researchers had, NASA researchers have looked at the South Pole Station as a microcosm, especially when it was much smaller. Now it's bigger, it's been rebuilt, and more people can stay there. But as a microcosm of what a colony on Mars might be like, what's the psychology of it? What are the challenges? What are the benefits? How can you make it work? So the South Pole is a super analogy for that. And every part of the continent, it's funny, around the coast, of course, there's a lot of differences and there's lots of weird and wacky and wonderful animals. But my book, and I wrote a book about this. I wrote many articles. I made radio programs. I think I've been back more than a dozen times different ways, but I've been most parts of the continent. So I went twice with the Americans, who have the best logistics. They actually have the biggest town in Antarctica. It's basically a base that's basically a town. It's thousands of people there in the summer, called McMurdo.
Wow.
And then I visited many different countries' bases dotted around the place. I went with the French and the Italians. I went with the British. So I've been on a Royal Navy icebreaker with a load of British squaddies servicing the different British stations down the peninsula. I've been on several tourist vessels. I've been on research vessels that were doing ocean research around the coast, and I've been to most of the parts of the interior on more or less any form of transport you can think of. And what I was doing in all of those places was this was to go there to understand what the scientists were finding, what it felt like to be there, and try to convey that to the world outside. So the articles that I wrote, the radio programs that I made, and then the book was supposed to be, this is what it feels like to be there, and this is what we learned from it. And what I found, my book naturally structured itself into two halves. And the first half was all the ways, it's like the classic hero's journey, all the ways in which Antarctica is weird and different and wild and alien. So the meteorites that land there, they land everywhere, but because there's nothing, no trees, no buildings, that you can find them much more easily. So some of the most celebrated meteorites, pieces of Mars, pieces of the moon, have been found in Antarctica. The alien way that the animals adapt and the strange way that they behave compared to anywhere else on the world. The astronomy that's so magically different there. The quietness that means you can listen to the interior of the Earth because it's the quietest place on Earth. So all the things that make it strange and different came into the first part of it. This is Antarctica's alien. And then I started writing about the ice cores. They have this incredible record of past history of climate. So you drill down into an ice core and the snow falls. More snow falls on top of it, more snow. It gets squeezed down. And so the deeper down you go, the further back in time you go. And if you measure the chemical constituents of each of those layers, you can see how climates change through time. And more magically, you can find pieces of air trapped in the ice that have not been breathed since before humans were invented. Pieces of air. So an ice core that went down more than 800,000 years. I was there when they hit bedrock. They let me drive the machine for part of it for the drilling, and they bring up these cores and then they analyze them. When it hit bedrock, it was a joint French-Italian station. It's a big European endeavor and had a few Americans in there as well. So the French, they had this massive, I don't know, Jeroboam, whatever, a massive bottle of champagne to celebrate this. And they took the biggest knife from the kitchen and lopped its head off. And they gave us all champagne in little cups, but they took some of the shavings from the bottom of the ice, 800,000-year ice. And they put it in the champagne. So the champagne was bubbling and this was popping, and air was coming out of it that has never been breathed by humans before. And that's how we celebrated it. It was wild. Also, people said, what did it taste like? And I said, well, it tasted a bit like drilling fluid, to be honest, but it was still very magical. But, so imagine this. So you start to find out about home. This is the Earth's history in the most direct way that you could possibly tell. And that's where it really sinks in, this demonstrating how we're changing the Earth's climate. Because you can see how the air has changed. You can see CO2 goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up and goes down naturally. And then it goes like this. It's very dramatic. And hard to argue with pieces of air. You can say, well, what are you inferring? But it's really hard to argue with pieces of air. So I wrote about that. And I also wrote about all the research that's showing that the ice has started to melt in different places. And realizing that it's not, Antarctica doesn't really care. So I went to visit places that had petrified forests and places where dinosaur bones had been found. 100 million years ago, Antarctica was on the South Pole, where it is now. You know, the continents move around the world, but it was on the South Pole 100 million years ago, and it was covered with ferns and forests and swamps and dinosaurs because the entire Earth was so much hotter. And then what started to happen was that in shallow seas around the world, trees fell into the shallow seas and got buried before they could rot and turned into coal, and sea creatures got buried and turned into oil and gas, and we started pumping down carbon from the air and putting it down into these fossil fuels, and we got colder and colder, and Antarctica froze over, and the rest of the world became this lovely temperate place that we have now. And now we're just kind of reversing that. And so what I found was that for the second half of my book, it wasn't so much, oh no, we have to protect Antarctica, because Antarctica doesn't really care. I bet it was gorgeous when it was covered with dinosaurs and swamps. But all of these clues, the signs of the ice melting, the signs that came from the core, it felt like this was a generous continent that was guarding our own history and giving it back to us and giving us a warning that we would do well to listen to.
And this idea of writing a book, I mean, that's a big undertaking. Was that just like an organic part of, I'm going to write for the science articles, I'm going to do the radio shows, and I'm going to write the book? Or how did that come about?
It's a great question. I only realized this recently when I was thinking about what I've always gravitated towards writing. I've never written news stories. And I was, for a long time, I was a science journalist, but I didn't do news. I always did features or longer form. And I always wanted to go deeper and see the connections. And if you're doing news, you see one snippet and then another snippet and another snippet. And then if you're doing something that's a bit more of a news feature, you might stick some of them together. But to do a feature, and especially to do a book, you know, if I could have written different articles, say an article about the ice cores, an article about the meteorites, an article about, and indeed I did, an article about the early adventurers, about the experience of being there. I did all of those things separately. But it's only when you put them together that you can start to see things like that hero's journey, the things that gets more and more alien, and then when it starts to tell you interconnected things about home. So I suppose I've been driven not just by how things connect, but also what you get when you try to go deeper into those connections. And that's what books give you. Every book I've written, I started off knowing what it's about, I thought, and I've always finished with going, oh, that's what it was about. And you can't fake it. You don't know until you've written it.
So how does it feel like after you finish a book? I've never written a book, but I've learned a lot from other people, what it means, what it takes. Is it always similar? Because you've written several books, that in the end, is there some kind of feeling of release? Finally, this piece is out there and it can do its own thing, or it's rather giving you all the ideas for the next things to do? How does it work for you?
So I always, I remember this same sensation I've written 4 books. I've reached them. It's so exhausting. It's so much time. It's so much trouble and effort and glory. But when I was printing out the final version to send it to a copy edit, just like having the final printed version out, I used to think, I wish I could just take this and go back in time and hand it to my earlier self and not have to go through all the pain. But of course, you know, because it's fun doing the research, but then when you have to write it, it feels like it's just a chore, but it's in the writing that you really see what it's about. So it's necessary. But there was a measure of joy and excitement and also a measure of sadness. I usually cry. It's like, oh no, I've been with this thing and now it's gone. My first book, actually, this is kind of a funny story, because I was teaching environmental science writing at Princeton as a visiting professor then, when my first book, I got the proof copy of it, and it was the first time it actually looked like a book. And all my life, I've venerated books. It's like the most precious thing. Imagine that. So when I saw it, I realized I've actually done that. I've made one of these things that I've venerated. I couldn't quite believe it. I was extremely excited, but I'd only just arrived at Princeton, and so I didn't really know many people there. So I couldn't go and say, look, come and celebrate with me. I was there in my office. But there's a famous writer called John McPhee, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner and has written for the New Yorker and was this kind of god of writing of this area. And he was in the same building. And I've been trying to pluck up my courage to put a note on his door saying maybe we could have a coffee sometime if that's all right. And he was never in. So I thought, this is my chance. You know what? I'll expend some of this energy. I will run up to his office, which is four or five stories up. Didn't take the lift. and I will put a note on his door. I was so excited I had to do something. So I ran up all 5 stairs and I got to the top and his door was open and he was in his office. And all I could do was double over going, for the first 5 minutes. He was so lovely. He just pulled out a chair and waited patiently while I sat on it for about 5 minutes trying to get my breath back before I said, hello, nice to meet you. And I told him why I was so excited and he understood perfectly and he became a lovely mentor and one of my friends as a consequence. But so that's what it felt like. It makes you want to run up 5 stories and also cry.
Wow.
Notice, obviously, in your books, obviously, you've written a lot about Antarctica, about ice, but also you wrote a book about air, right, and the atmosphere. And I also know that you are a very avid diver now. So I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite element? And not in a chemical sense, but like,
I understood. You mean fire, air, water, or earth? I know.
Yeah.
What a great question.
Because you seem to have spent time everywhere, unlike most humans.
Yeah. Okay, so fire is fascinating, of course. And it's very, I can be mesmerized by it. I can sit and watch a fire for hours. And it has those different characteristics of being both fiercely destructive and also the warmth, the shelter, the food, the home, the hearth. And I love those twin aspects of it. Air, well, I mean, Earth, when I first discovered how the interior of the Earth works and how volcanoes work and earthquakes and how the oceans are formed and how the continents move around, I was captivated beyond belief. And sometimes I just stand there and think, down there, if I go down a column from where I am, there's the crust and there's the mantle and then there's the plumes and then there's the core and there's the magnetic field. And it's not in some other place, it's actually here, and it seems mind-boggling. So I love going to volcanoes and feeling where the energy touches the skin and feeling so close to it as a way to imagine your way down. So those are things I love about those. Air, I wrote the book about air because one of my friends said to me, I'd always wondered how people figured out that the air has things in it. And I've been trying to think about what my next book should be. And I thought, that's an interesting question. I started to think about it and look at it. And I realized that if I said to you what's in my hands now, you'd say nothing. And I'd say the most miraculous stuff in the universe, because it's made of things that bring us food, that bring us shelter, that move temperature around the place, that also, and then the layers above our heads protect us from the most extraordinary and hostile environment you can possibly imagine without even blinking. People say, oh, air's so fragile, this thin little thing. And I go, no, it's as tough as boots. Without it, we'd be nothing. So what sort of person can do that? What sort of person, that's probably made of stuff. I wonder what and how I can find out. What sort of person looked up and thought, I wonder what that layer's doing and that. And I called my book An Ocean of Air because Torricelli, a disciple of Galileo, was the first person to weigh air. So the first person to figure out that air is actually heavy. So I did this calculation. If you take a column around you and go all the way up to the edge of space and say, how much does that air weigh that's pressing down on you now? I could ask you to guess, or I could just tell you. Should I ask you to guess?
Sure. Couple of kilograms.
Great suggestion. That's what you think, isn't it? 1.5 tons. 1.5 tons. It's no wonder you feel so weighed down sometimes. And the only reason it doesn't crush us is we're pushing back. We have air inside us. We have air around us. We're pushing back. If we didn't, we crumple. If you take something and suck out the air, it doesn't suck. It's the air outside that pushes it, that crushes it. So he figured out that air is heavy and wrote a letter to one of his friends saying, we live submersed at the bottom of an ocean of air. And I realized that we think we're like lobsters. We're walking around on this surface going, well, everything happens on the surface with no idea this entire ocean of everything that's around, of all the currents, of all the animals, of everything is all going there. We kind of think it's all about the surface, just like a lobster might think it's all about the seabed and have no idea what's above it. So that seemed captivating. So I loved that because I found out so much about the amazing, what sort of eyes do you have to look at air like that? What sort of people? Incredible characters. There was so much fun researching them, writing about them, moving from the 17th century up to the present day and up to the edge of space. I love air because of that. Because when I look, I think about, look at that tree. It made its body out of thin air. Still blows my mind. That's the ultimate carbon capture device. But I did all of that to say those are the things I like about the other elements. But it has to be water. I hadn't noticed until you asked me. And that's where the ice thing comes from. I made a TV program about ice once where I looked at all the weird properties it has. And there's something very magical about an element that exists at our temperature level between so many states, between steam and liquid, between liquid and solid. Ice has these incredible characteristics that it's so strong, it can carve out valleys, but it can also disappear in an instant. And so that strength and that vulnerability and the fragility together were the two things that captivated me about ice. And that's fundamentally because of the characteristics of water. If ice didn't float, we wouldn't have life. And ice shouldn't float. Most solids don't float in their own liquid. So the characteristics of water, the way that it has all these hydrogen bonds, I think about them as like handshakes. So the molecules going on, they shake hands and let go, they shake hands and let go. And it makes for a very strange set of characteristics. So in principle, for the physics and chemistry, I love water. But the main thing is, I was diving a few weeks ago in Raja Ampat in West Papua. The biggest concentration of coral and sub-ocean species biodiversity anywhere in the world. It's the Coral Triangle. They've got like 80% of all species are concentrated there. And it was, I still carry it in my heart. It was extraordinary. And so the privilege of diving there, being able to move around in 3 dimensions and the things that you can see is wonderful. Several times I found myself crying inside my mask because I was realizing the beauty of the place, exquisite beauty. But then we came back up and went for a speedboat ride in a lagoon. And I looked up and I saw some birds congregating, some magnificent frigate birds. And I got this rush of sadness that I couldn't just fly up there and hang out with them. Because I'd just been hanging out with the fish, going up there and down there, swimming around. It's the closest you can get to flying without being asleep. So I think that the freedom that you feel in water, and also there's one point when I was diving where I was on the edge of a set of coral, and all the other dive buddies had all gone through a swim through, and you're supposed to stay with the group, but I just hung there in the blue a moment longer and looked towards all the coral, then looked out and thought, everything in the ocean, every species, every ocean, every body of water touches this point here. Every shark, every tiny creature, every ocean in the world is interconnected. So where I am now, hanging in here in the blue, I can touch it all. There's nothing in the way. And that's also a thrilling feeling, that kind of sense of connection and freedom. So I gave you a very long answer for a short question, but gosh, I had no idea. It's water. The answer's water. This is long form, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure. This is what this is about.
And captivating description. I mean, you're literally taking us on a journey to different places. Really, really nice. So it was so interesting to hear you getting to know John McPhee. I'm curious, who are other figures that have served as your mentors over time?
Gosh, there's been so many of them, and some of them, really brilliant writer friends who've helped me all the way through how to understand, how to articulate my thinking, and then brilliant friends in the climate space, in the nature space. I think the name that immediately came to mind was Christiana Figueres. She's been a hero of mine for a long time and has become a friend and mentor in a way that I can't tell you how much I appreciate. She has so much, you imagine everybody wants a piece of her. She's fierce. She's vulnerable. She's a charismatic leader. She cares intensely. She's pragmatic. She's funny. She doesn't give in. She's honest and open. She's so courageous, and of course everybody wants a piece of her for that, for all of those things. And she gives of it very generously. So she invited me 4 years ago to join a cohort of climate leaders in Plum Village, the Vietnamese Buddhist monastery in France, in Burgundy. In Bordeaux. And I was one of 30 there, where she told us that her experiences at Plum Village had saved her life. And also, when she was right on the edge, it pulled her back and helped her to see how she could be strong. And she also said that that she learned that the practice of deep listening that she learned at Plum Village is how she got the Paris Agreement. She could not have got the Paris Agreement without it. So she realized that she could just take that for herself, or she could see so many climate leaders who were wrestling with the same things that she had been and see if she could share it. So that was in collaboration with TED Countdown for that first year, and we were a kind of test cohort. But they've done 3 more. I've been to all of them, where it's like 200 now, 200 more, 200 more. But also they've been doing these retreats, taking the monastics from Plum Village around the world to Costa Rica, to Canada, I believe to Kenya. I think that I don't know if the Australia one's happened yet, to Bali, and in each of those places, bringing the kinds of connecting teachings, how to listen deeply, how to connect yourself to nature in a way that grounds you, but how to do that in an active way in the real world that doesn't derail you. It supports the practical, real things that you're trying to do. And so that's how I kind of properly got to know her. And
can you give just some tips? So how do you connect to nature? Especially in this day and age, I'm sure many people are struggling.
So the biggest tip, they teach deep listening, and so I can't. So and in a way that's more powerful than the connect to nature part, but it's related to it. They teach deep listening, and I wouldn't dream of trying to supplement, trying to repeat their teaching in a few minutes when I'm very much not the person to do it. But I can tell you two things that I took that really transformed the way that I approach my work. One of them was, in the practice of deep listening, they sit around in a circle. 2 important things. You don't interrupt anybody, you just let them speak, however long it takes, short or long. And also, everybody speaks kind of to the center of the circle. It's not like you said this or I said this. And you respond by saying, that made me think this, or that made me feel this, not my advice to you is, oh, this is how I can. You just listen. And what I discovered is that if you do that, even one-on-one as well, if you just wait and listen. One person, a very, very brilliant and important climate leader, said, oh my gosh, I realized I usually listen like Pac-Man. Right, I've got the knowledge now, here's what we should do about it. And I think we all do that a little bit. I'm listening to get what I need so that I can turn it into something and make the suggestion, this is what we do, this is how we do it. But this is almost listening for the sake of listening, just making someone feel heard. And what I discovered is, if you're listening without the possibility of offering a solution, or saying that reminds me of something that I did that's kind of the same, the quality of your presence becomes materially different, and the person you're listening to changes. And it happens with CEOs, it happens in business meetings, it happens in board meetings. If you really listen to someone and they're aware that you're doing it, they open. And then when they're done, you can bring something to them that they would never have been able to hear otherwise. So it was immensely powerful, and it has changed the way that I show up in lots of things. And the other one was a spaciousness. They said, if you get stuck in a traffic light and the traffic light turns red just as you get there and you're in a hurry, or if you're waiting for a bus or a train and it's late by 5 or 10 minutes, or if there's something that you're trying to get to, then if you can ever say to yourself, the universe has just given me the gift of 2 minutes and all I have to do is nothing and be here and look around. Try it. It's awesome. I've shown up trapped in a traffic jam, late for a meeting, with a presence that is wildly different than I would have done before. And again, so I think one of the things I learned from Christiana and from Plum is that how you show up is just as important as what you say, and what the kind of content you take out. The quality of your presence is just as important as the information that you're giving and getting. And I learned that from Christiana. And also, she just she's challenging, but I don't know. She has this quality of human warmth coupled with fierce intelligence and pragmatism, that is just something that has really helped me understand how not to try to either be human or be strong and smart, but to put them together, to bring your whole self and the power of it.
Let's move to another topic that I'm curious after this very beautiful description of that mentorship. I think we can shift slowly to carbon removal. And one thing that, or climate topics more broadly, but especially on carbon removal, one thing that I noticed is that until, what was it, 2016, 17, when you had a topic and you addressed it through research, science, writing. And then a moment came where you decided that you needed to do things differently. You needed to get your hands even more dirty. You were already getting your hands dirty in other ways, right? But you decided, okay, no, I need to create infrastructure, create companies, create whatever is necessary to move the needle. So I'm curious, when did that transition happen? And that can be carbon removal. Maybe it was something before. I just noticed it through the lens of carbon removal.
Yeah, so I moved into working with the private sector very intentionally around the time, not long after I did that radio series, when I realized I have to do something, and again I kind of discovered the private sector a little bit by accident, because people I'd been making a general nuisance for myself about climate with the books, with the radio programs, with the TV programs. So I just got calls from people saying, "Can you come and talk to our CEO, or can you come and talk to our investor conference?" Because then, as now, there was a dearth of people who could both understand the technical aspects, but could also convey it in a way that an audience would resonate with. And so that's become one of the major things that I've been doing ever since. I give a lot of keynotes. And so it's that tailor for the audience and kind of use the language that will resonate, but bring in the technicality, bring in the facts, so that, you know, you have the combination of the authority, but also the engagement. And so I had been working with lots of senior figures across more or less every sector on decarbonisation. So I was working with Paul Polman when he was CEO of Unilever, and Ajay Banga when he was CEO of MasterCard, with Ben Van Beurden when he was CEO of Shell. I worked across very different sectors on the principle that if you work with a really big company, a senior person, big company, if you can shift them, then other people will shift too, and that will shift the whole thing. And so I did a lot of work with what kinds of, and also bringing in expertise from my many friends in the climate space, my many friends in academia, friends in journalism. It's like helping business leaders think from a different angle so that they could be more effective in changing their businesses. I did learn from that changing that theory of change, that if one big company goes, then the rest follow, turns out not to be true. It was a good go, but it doesn't. It's not enough. It's necessary, perhaps, but not sufficient. And so about 2016, I decided that I needed to do more, that I needed to do something that was more systemic. And so I actually did a year. It wasn't this time. For once in my life, it wasn't by accident. It was by design. I spent a year giving keynotes, going around the world, doing, you know, giving my talks, and everywhere I was going, I was trying to figure out what are the areas where I could have the biggest systemic impact. What are the things that need to happen in the climate space, that need to happen most, that where if I could unblock it, it would have the biggest overall impact? And I have the kind of skills and I know the kind of people that can help to unlock it. By this point, you know, I have this network of very senior leaders in business. I have this network of senior leaders in the climate space. I have this network of journalists, of academics. I have relationships of trust and connection, and I have my own abilities, and I have the people that I can call on to help me do work. So how do I spend it? And that was really the question I asked for about a year. It was very intentional. And I found two areas of climate where I thought this could really make a difference. One of them was actually pension funds. How pension funds are spent, people just don't understand. Trillions of dollars that could be redirected in a heartbeat, a fire hose of money that could be redirected in a heartbeat if there was enough conditions. So I was looking at that. And the other thing was negative emissions. It started off actually as carbon capture and storage. One thing that I'd written about, I wrote a book with Sir David King when he was Chief Scientific Advisor to the UK government back in the day. It's called The Hot Topic. And in that, we both said, you know, this needs to happen, that is carbon capture and storage needs to happen. We need these as part of the mix. But I began to look at that and think, well, if it's needed, who's making it happen? And the answer was not many. And then I was looking at the science, and it was utterly incontrovertible that we already need this. But Greenpeace were not marching in the street saying we want this. They were actually marching in the street saying we don't. So I thought, is this something I can help unlock? So it started with carbon capture and storage, mainly because, and at the time, people hadn't made the kind of connection of separation out. There was kind of carbon capture and storage, there was carbon capture, there were offsets, there was this kind of whole space. And it hadn't really got the precision of language or understanding that we've managed to get to now. So I thought this is an area where the science seems to say that there's a big gap that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And if I look at the size of the gap that is already, let alone the one that it's likely to end up, and I look at the percentage of people working on it, then there's a mismatch, a material mismatch. We have a very big hole to fill, and we have a tiny fraction of people who are actually trying to make it happen. So that looks like an area where I could make a difference. So I started investigating. I did some work on CCS that made me start to understand that CCS, carbon capture and storage, was an important component, not just of industrial decarbonisation for things like cement and steel and coal, but also the basis for these emerging new technologies. Direct air capture needs somewhere to put the CO2 that it captures. BECCS, this kind of bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, you burn biomass and you get the CO2, but where do you put it for that to be a negative emission? So I started to look into that and realized that there were other ways to do this. There were obviously trees, there were soils, there was this biochar, there was enhanced rock weathering. There were all these different approaches that could be used to make negative emissions happen. And I realized that when I was talking to the NGOs, they really hated the idea of CCS on coal because there are alternatives. You can do solar, you can do wind. They hated the idea of CCS on steel because you can do electric arc furnaces. But I said to them, we're going to have to develop a large amount of geological storage because look at the scale of the need for negative emissions. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And they would always say, yeah, that's the thing. You're right. So that was the area that began to be clear was the bigger play. We have left it too late. We have made this massive hole. And if we can create a capacity to withdraw carbon dioxide back from the atmosphere and keep it out, we can buy ourselves back the time that we've wasted. We can have a fighting chance to get to our climate goals. And if we don't, we will blast past 2 degrees, 3 degrees beyond. All of the other work will be for naught if we can't make this. And so that's what really captivated my attention. I spent a year, I was talking to all my friends in the climate space, making a nuisance of myself, nagging people, saying, we need to do something. Who's going to do this? You need to help me. And one of those was the climate champions, Nigel Topping, who was then the climate champion for the UK government when the COP26 event was coming up in Glasgow. And after a couple of these conversations, Nigel said, okay, we need to help you. I'll put someone on it. And we started working with the climate champions. So we did a year of where are all the fault lines? How are people thinking about this? Why are they not calling for it? What's needed? And that's when I did my TED talk on carbon removals, and we did events at COP, and we did events before that and after that. And that's when I began to realize this is the thing I've been looking for. There's no point in somebody like me working on electric vehicles or solar power or heat pumps. Those things are all important. Even avoided deforestation, all of those things have cohorts of brilliant people trying to make them happen. But this is the area that needs me. And if I can do anything to unlock this, I will have more impact on the future of the earth than anything else I can do. So that's why I did it.
I don't know, Sebastian, if you want to go deeper into the entrepreneurship, but for me, because I was listening to you, Gabrielle, like how you're talking about the need for removals and why this is important. A big part of your work has been around the narrative, right? And it's, I mean, you're great at building narratives, you're great at storytelling, and you have taken it on yourself to establish certain narratives around carbon removal. I remember working with you also for the narratives for upcoming COPs, for example. So there's a lot of thinking that you've done on this. And now it has been already quite some years since you've been working on it. What I would be curious to know is, has your thinking on the appropriate narrative changed, and how has it changed over the years that you worked deeply on removals?
It's evolved very materially, as we all learn. But one thing I wanted to say here is that there's two different ways in which or maybe three different ways in which I work on narrative. So one of them is and continues to be that kind of storytelling, how to think about carbon removals, why so many different methods are so exciting. The projects, it is a material part of the whole. The projects are fascinating, and the clever ways to remove, and the implications for biodiversity, the implications for local communities, but also the chemistry of it, the physics of it, the energy around it, the coolness of it is part of what I'm here to help to convey. But then there's also the narrative in the sense of framing, like how do we think about removals? How do carbon removals fit into climate solutions as a whole? How do they fit into industrial processes? How do they fit into business plans? How do they fit into the ways that chief financial officers think? How do they fit into the ways that the procurement officers think? So that's where it's more like helping people with different origins and frameworks to frame carbon removals in the context of what they already understand and know, and to see how they fit together. One of the things that I've learnt is that if you take any set of solutions and you put them in a box marked, this must be separate in the corner of the room, they will fail. You have to show how they integrate and how they interconnect, or they will fail. So there's the kind of the general inspiration and excitement around removals. And I tell you, carbon removals is the most exciting thing I have ever touched. I've never seen anything like this. And I've touched a lot of exciting things. So that's something. But then also the framing. So how this can fit in with how you already think and what you're already trying to do, especially in business, in policy, and in regulations, so that it's not separate but together. And then the third way is, which are the narratives that are blocking progress? So that people, and this is where we kept identifying binaries. Like there's a binary of reductions versus removals. You should either do reduction or you should do removals. There's a binary which is do it now versus do it later. There's a binary which is, and this is one I've talked about a lot, and in fact I have an op-ed coming out on this in Nature, and I think in a couple of weeks, nature versus tech. Should it be nature or should it be tech? And there's a binary between them. Which side are you on, boy? And so a lot of that work is bridging those binaries into more analog narratives that are actually more helpful, because one of the things that I've learned in that is in those forced binaries, everybody loses. It's not like one side wins, everybody loses. Well, if you think about, it used to be the reductions versus removals. So I'd hear very often, we can't talk about carbon removals because then people will give up on trying to reduce. And I remember one advantage of having worked on climate so long is I can see the same kind of patterns coming around again. And I remember this used to be the same thing about adaptation. People would say, you can't talk about adaptation because that's giving up on reducing. If we ever say adaptation, people say, well, we'll just adapt then, let's not bother. And that was never a sensible thing to say at the time, because we were already at a place where it was too late. We had to bring adaptation into the mix. And if you ignore it, it just gets worse. And I think it's a similar thing now. So the way you can break it down, that analogy, people who have been frustrated about adaptation, but were saying this about removals, if you can say, remember that happened, and this is kind of the same thing, that's one of the ways to break it down. Another thing is which are the things that are optional and which are the things that are not. So some of the things that carbon removals have kind of got associated with and almost damned by association. So if you don't like carbon capture and storage, if you vaguely call it carbon capture, then it can be like, we don't need that, we don't want that. Carbon capture means keeping coal in play. We don't want coal, we want solar power. So if you can say, absolutely, go right ahead with your phasing out coal and all the work you're doing on that. In the meantime, there is no other solution for carbon removal. We have this hole, and the only way to fill it is by taking CO2 out of the sky and keeping it out. So it's not like you can go coal or solar. And it was very helpful when the IPCC came out and said that carbon removals were unavoidable. But nonetheless, so it's helping people understand it's not, do we prefer the purple one or the green one? It's however we do it, we have to do it. And then all of the discussion should be how, not whether. And so that was another way to break down the reductions versus removals. Similarly, in the nature versus tech, There are some, we've talked about this on a podcast with you before, because this is one that drives me crazy. You know, I mean, my background is technical. My life has been engaging with nature. I don't see a conflict. And what happens is the nature people, so they have projects, they want to support reforestation, afforestation. They want to make sure that the trees get the money that they need. And so if people say the only real carbon removal is one that's permanent, that can't reverse, has a very low risk of reversing, trees can obviously be chopped down or burned or get diseased. If you say the only real removal is a permanent one, then you trigger the antibodies in the trees guys who say, well, what about our projects? And if you say, we have to do trees are much cheaper, do those instead, then you trigger the antibodies in the guys and gals who are trying to make high durability, low risk removals that don't exist yet. So the way that I'm trying to frame this is different, to say it's a timeline. You shouldn't be thinking in a snapshot mentality. We're not at 2050 yet. What do we do to get from here to the kind of net zero space that we need to be? So trees, I think this is brilliantly ironic. Trees have the highest technology readiness level of any carbon removal approach that's out there, because we know how to do them. We've been doing them for a really long time. So, and they can scale quickly. So if we're looking at ways to scale carbon removals quickly now, tie that to biodiversity goals, which are also important, and tie that to the nature goals that so many companies have. You have a ready, easy way to step onto the carbon removal bandwagon, if you like. So trees make sense for now and next. But we can't just stop the trees and then go, now what, and start again. So we need to be investing now in building the capacity, so when nature's capacity to soak up carbon starts to diminish, we have the takeover capacity of high durability removals that can scale in different ways. So this is how they fit together. I used to go to my mum and say, which is better, my picture or my brother's picture? And she'd say both. And I go, no, but which is better? and the answer is not just both, but it's which is right for which circumstances, and how do they fit together in ways that mean that we can actually address all of our climate outcomes. And that's the sort of language and narrative that I think is starting to land among everyone. And the final thing there is, if you say not your thing, and if you say not your thing, everybody loses confidence in everything and says, I'll wait. And then everybody loses. And that's something that is really starting to land. If we don't figure out how this fits together, then we will slow even more when we need to accelerate.
I think to follow up on the narrative, in recent month or so, I think we've seen a few people write about carbon removal needing a new narrative, that we cannot talk about anymore. The gigatons needed by 2050, for example, that doesn't resonate. We need to find new angles. For example, when we talk about policies, not just linking removals with climate, but finding many other hooks to bring it in and make it more politically palatable. Is there anything on your mind in terms of the latest developments when it comes to the narrative that you kind of find helpful?
So I'm starting to see the shift isn't really happening fast enough, but because of the way that the world has been going, because of the global geopolitical situation, because of the headwinds around climate action generally, when I started on this in 2021, 2022, it was cool and fashionable to be a climate leader and set net zero targets. And in 2019, almost nobody had heard of a net zero target. And by 2021, 92% of global GDP generators either had their own net zero target or were operating in a territory that's set there. So it's a fashionable thing to do. And then suddenly companies began to realize that if they did this and did it wrong, they were likely to end up on the front page of The Guardian being criticized. But if they didn't do anything, they'd be fine. On top of that, the reputational benefit, the marketing benefit, the brand benefit of acting on this was starting to diminish. At the same time, in a way, the difference between let's have a nice target and how do we actually do it? How much does it cost? How does it work practically? Was starting to bite. And so it became much harder because it became much more real. And I don't mourn those days of it not being real at all. I think this is evidence of what we're trying to achieve, that this is becoming real. So, but what I have noticed is that the what I'm hearing from the companies. So, I have two organizations that I co-founded. The first one called Rethinking Removals, a non-profit, which I did in partnership with the Climate Champions back in 21. Which is still operating very strongly in the marketing, in the understanding the market, in the narrative space, and especially working with standard setters, rule setters, policy, and lately carbon accounting, the enabling infrastructure for companies to be able to act on carbon removals. And with my co-founder Delia Meth-Cohen and our team, we work very intensely on all of those areas. But I discovered that wasn't enough. I was giving lots of keynotes. People were saying that's compelling. Companies were saying that's compelling. Where do I press? And I didn't have a good answer for them. So I co-founded CUR8 with Marta Kropinska. Marta came to this from fintech. She was a serial entrepreneur. She'd made companies before. She knew how to go about it. I met her when she was a senior exec at Google, making a fund off Google's balance sheet to invest in underserved founders, women and people of color. Doing it brilliantly, leveraging Google's brand to get more money into those companies, which she did incredibly well. But when I met her, she said, I want to build something. I want it to be in climate. I've just come across this incredible field of carbon removals and I want to do that. But unusually, she didn't want to collaborate with another tech person, another tech founder who had lots of experience in this. She wanted someone who had a long record in climate, who understood removals, who'd worked with big companies, who could bring that whole area that she didn't have. And I was looking for her. So it was very magical. And we've been working ever since very intensely with companies to understand what they actually need to be able to come off the fence and start on the carbon removal space. And so we work with big companies like Coca-Cola, with British Airways, with our first customer was actually the Queen. We carbon removed the Queen's Jubilee, and then she died, so we carbon removed her funeral. We've carbon removed. We did the world's first carbon removed concert at the O2 with the 1975. We carbon removed London Marathon. We've just we're carbon removing for the Mercedes Formula One team. The different fascinating brands that are starting to engage in this space, and we're talking to so many more. We're working with quite a few financial institutions, banks as well, to how to get the financing into this. And what I'm hearing is an appetite, a need to say, how is this relevant to my business? As this gets real, I want to do the right thing. I heard from a very large company the other day, a senior figure in sustainability, a very large company, who said, what should a responsible company do now in the carbon removal space? How do I balance this with everything else? I don't understand. I don't know. And so the narrative of what's happening with regulations, with legislation, with policies, the language of what's anyone else doing? How do I fit this with my business? How do I make it relevant to my business? Am I doing this in my value chain? Is this helping me engage with suppliers? Is this enabling me to make products at a premium that mean that I can have a better offering for my customers? It's become much more business tangible, the narrative that people are looking for. And the reason I think this is deeply relevant is that our analysis is that the way to get the carbon removals industry to grow, and I'm not the only one saying this, is we need proof of future market, is the way that I put it. If all these fantastic burgeoning companies, the 2,600 we're tracking, if they can prove there's a market for their offering in the form of an offtake from a AAA company that says, when you make it, I'll buy it, then they can get debt. They can go to a bank and they'll say, use the offtake as collateral, and they can get the money. And I describe all of this as Operation Get the Money in the Hands of the People with the Shovels. So if we're trying to get the money in the hands of the people with the shovels, the way to do that is to get companies to say, I believe in this market. When you make it, I'll buy it. And then everything will unlock. So all of my work right now is, what does it take to get companies ready to engage with carbon removals to be willing to make an offtake that can enable money to flow. And it doesn't have to be an offtake too. It can also be a forward purchase, or it can be an offtake within a value chain, an inset if you like, but any of these different ways. So you asked how the narrative's changed, and I would say it's what's the relevance to my business. If you can tell me that, I will buy. And if I buy, I can unlock the money. The money will mean that the industry can grow. Other people will see me buying and say, I'll do that too. And the whole thing can snowball. And it's very, very challenging at the moment to construct that narrative. But I think we're that close.
I'd like to go much deeper on that because, like, objectively, if we look from outside, companies can't really make claims with the carbon removal purchases, right? SBTI is kind of letting down the CDI industry big time. We can talk about that in detail, but kind of my perspective. And the business case, I know that you focus a lot on the airline industry because that's a great example of, I think, an industry that needs it more than others. But what are some of the industries, if you can get quite specific, like what are industries where you've seen that business case being more tangible, and what does that look like?
We started working with British Airways, and when we did, we constructed a portfolio for them, which at a stroke made them the biggest airline purchaser of carbon removals in the world, and also the largest UK company purchase. And the question, why would they do that? It was still a small fraction of their overall need, but it was a beginning. And what they asked us to do was construct a portfolio of the most innovative approaches across the whole spectrum. They're an innovative company. They wanted innovation in the credits, but they also wanted innovation in the credits because if they were going for an innovative company, then this is something that their money can help the whole industry to grow. And it's the same kind of thing that Melanie Nakagawa told us. We did an event with Melanie Nakagawa, who was the Chief Sustainability Officer of Microsoft. Microsoft have bought 90% of all the carbon removal purchases to date. They're the biggest driver of the market. So CUR8 and Microsoft did a joint event in Gold's House in Davos to talk about what Microsoft's done and how other companies can follow. And she said, we are building the market we need to buy from. So that was their motivation. They know they need this. They know they're going to need it at scale. They know they're going to need it at a much more tractable price. And so this is building the market they want to buy from. And that was one of the drivers of why British Airways, Carrie Harris, the very brilliant sustainability director at British Airways, with strong support from Sean Doyle, her CEO, said, we want to start the process of building the market we need to buy from. So if you go for the most innovative approaches, then you're also helping to build the market disproportionately. So that's one of the kind of business arguments. But also, they wanted to do it because they know that they need support from the British government. If British Airways alone paid the kind of prices that are needed for the carbon removals that are currently available or that are likely to be available, it would bankrupt them for the amount of emissions that they calculate they're going to need. So they need support to get these removals down the cost curve from the British government and from other governments too. So they said we want to be taken seriously by the UK government, and that worked. The conversations became much more powerful. So those are some of the reasons why people would start on this. When we're doing our due diligence of projects at CUR8, we have 5 pillars. One of them is obviously, does this do what it's supposed to do? Does it remove CO2 from the atmosphere? That's the climate integrity. One is for the team. Are they using the right methodology, the right approach? Do we trust them? Do they have the right science advice? Do they use the right life cycle analysis, the right boundaries for their numbers and so on? So do we trust them to deliver the right outcome for the project? But then there's 3 more which we think are equally important. One of them is future potential. So the money should be going to the projects that have the biggest capacity to scale so that we can really accelerate this. One of them is risk of non-delivery. We're increasingly hearing from customers that now that they're getting more business-like about what they want to do with their projects, what they want to do with their removals, they need to know, is it going to come? And is it going to come on time at the right volume? And one of them is beyond carbon. I'm starting a campaign actually to stop calling these co-benefits and start calling them core benefits. So beyond carbon is things like, biodiversity, benefits for local communities. These have a potential downside. If you don't take them seriously, there's a serious reputational risk. But if you do take them seriously, you give the project more longevity. If you have biodiversity associated with the project, you have a potential for another income stream. If you have strong community engagement and strong community benefits from the project, the government's likely to support it, the locals are likely to support it. And so we think these are very fundamental to the project. So those are some of the things that I'd characterize about where the business argument comes in. But companies are saying to us, what about the geographies? Can we have geographies that are relevant to where we operate? So in that first portfolio we put together for British Airways, they just started a new route to Ghana. So they wanted some projects in Ghana. They were celebrating the anniversary of a route to India. So they wanted projects in India. But others have told us things like, we want projects that our executives can visit. Find projects within a 2-hour distance of one of our sites so that we can make it tangible. And others still have said, how does this relate to our value chain? Can we show how this ties into our business more materially? So I think there's starting to be much more of a make this tangible for our business kind of approach to this business model. But then, I agree with you. Question one from the CFOs is anyone telling us to do this now? And at the moment, the Science-Based Targets Initiative is not, there's no other standards out there that are telling you to do it now. The policies are saying it's coming. The Oxford offsetting principles, which many companies are using to assess how they should do this, did say that. It said start now. It's the first one of all of the different standards. And we worked with them very closely to bring this in because we knew this was the most important thing to say. But we've also been working with the ISO Net Zero Aligned Organization Standard, which will publish later this year, which will say you have to have a short-term interim target for removals. And you need to start now and build that up and show how you're going to do it. And even the SBTI, the latest version of the draft, is saying by 2035, you need to be buying this. You better start thinking about it. So the way that I'm describing this, meantime, the UK government has said it's going to incorporate removals into its emissions trading scheme. The European Union is deciding how to do that for the early 2030s. Japan's already doing it. So I'm describing this as a time of pre-compliance. We're not really in a voluntary space anymore. We've got the signals from the future. We can see the kinds of things that the standards and the policies are saying we're going to need to do. So this is an opportunity for trial and learn, for starting to build up, for getting on those on-ramps, for getting the internal buy-in and learning, and also to start to make the engagements with the best projects that are also, by the way, starting to sell out for earlier vintages, and really secure your supply as you can see what's coming. And those are the kinds of arguments that are really landing, tie it to my business, and also show me how this fits in this pre-compliance space with what I'm going to be needing.
This pre-compliance phase, kind of an unfortunate reality right now, because everything that is yet to come is still typically a few years out. And a few years is a long time when you talk about the project that needs to get money on the table now to actually become operational, right? And we don't have strong signals from SBTI, as has already come up, and well, we're still waiting for ISO standard to see if there's something more.
We've been working with them very closely, and there will be. There will be.
There will be. Oh, yeah. That is great news to bring out.
And with the SBTI, I haven't seen the latest version, but I've heard some of the kind of rumors and the discussions and some of the backtalk. And really, I think it's going to be more powerful for removals than people are expecting. But even if it just sticks to what it said in the draft, which is by 2035, every SBTI company has to be buying removals. No. In the draft, it was to be an SBTI company, you have to be buying removals in 2035. Before that, you can build up or not. But by 2035, if you're an SBTI company, you can't get the SBTI recognition for the net zero standard unless you're buying removals. And so that I don't know if that will survive, but that's what the draft said. So that's a real signal from the future. And so the way that I'm looking at this is, if I were a betting woman, and I kind of am, by the early mid 2030s, I would be very confident that the standards for corporates, which are professionalizing, which are much less, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the Science Based Targets Initiative are really professionalizing into proper standards making bodies from where they came from the NGO space. So those standards will have requirements for removals. And then on top of that, there will be requirements for removals, certainly in Europe. We're seeing this in Asia. Japan's already bringing this in. So I'd say early to mid-30s, yeah, it's going to be widespread. It's going to be clear. And the question is, what about between now and then? If we wait till then, there will be no capacity and it will be too late. The existing cohort will have fallen over and it takes a long time to get it back. But if we just give enough signals now to start on that exponential curve, it doesn't have to be a lot, but it does have to be now. That's the thing that will make the difference. So what I'm working on now is all about how to demonstrate business value for acting now so that we can then, as a world and as individual businesses, secure the supply. And that argument looks like pre-compliance, signals coming, you know what's needed, best projects are selling out, the market's tightening, get access to supply, get the internal, build the internal muscle. Also explore where the business models might be for where you can sell into this industry as it's growing. I've heard some heavy industry players who are saying we want to buy from the companies that we might want to sell to. Same with professional services. They want to be able to sell into this too. So build the expertise and show that you're engaged in this. The banks want to do the deals. They can smell the money. So they want to position themselves as being the ones who will lend into this. And so, these are the sorts of arguments that are prevailing with companies outside the early buyers.
If I can follow up on something you just said, that the best projects are selling out. I keep hearing, depending on the situation, where you end up, either that, we don't have enough buyers, or we are supply constrained, or the truth seems to be that for certain projects, there is a lot of demand and not enough supply, or for certain types of removals. And for others, there is a mismatch in the other direction. Like, what's your take on it?
So we have at CUR8, we have a framing for delivery risk for projects. And it is starting to look more like the more expensive projects are the ones with the lower delivery risk within a set of methods. But what we look at, because companies, even if they're not claiming, if they're saying we're buying this because we said we're going to do this and we want to retire this against this so we can demonstrate that we're on our plan, they want to know they're going to get the credits. So we have had some big companies saying we need to know that either we'll get them or we can replace them. So if we've developed a replacement matrix for different methods and different projects, which is what's the risk that they won't deliver in a particular year? And what's the chance that there will be enough equivalent credits on the spot market that you could swap them out? And then what's your appetite for risk? If you're not wanting to claim something from this, but you're just wanting to engage, or you want something that has this material connection to your business, but might be a bit more risky and you want to learn, then these are some of the areas. If you want to be absolutely sure you're going to get it, then these are some of the methods. And I think that's one of the ways that many of the people we're speaking to are finding useful to think about this, that what do you want to use it for? How certain do you want to be? And you know what? It's not really rocket science. It's kind of how you do investment portfolios, right? You balance different risk appetites for different purposes. So one of the things that I started to find here is, Melanie brought this up in Davos. She said, forward offtakes are not something wildly new and weird. We did them in the pharma space for accelerating the progress of vaccines. We did them in power purchase agreements and so on. So, and starting to see the analogies. People think about this removal space as being very weird and different, but we've solved a lot of these problems before in other areas. And I think bringing those analogs into here can be really helpful.
I mean, I want to come back to kind of your storyteller, right? And you've spent kind of a career telling science, communicating science. When it comes to removal, what type of storytelling do you find is either missing or you find most compelling when you're trying to convince policymakers, business leaders?
Well, I would say that in a way, like any good story, there are two very key, well, maybe there's two very key elements, which I might loosely characterize as the heart and the head. So, one key element is it's got to stand. So if you're talking to a CFO and you say, la, 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 it's really exciting and fun, they'll go, next. Right. So it's got to connect to the way that they think about the world. It's got to resonate, and it's got to show this is how it fits with your remit, the way you're thinking about this, with your business. It doesn't necessarily have to have an immediate return, but it does have to fit with our approach, the way that we think about this, how we do other things, how I think. So that's one very, very important element. It's not that when I was teaching the science writing at Princeton, and I asked my students, what's the most important thing you need to know before you start writing or preparing a story? And they'd say, like, what length it is, what the topic is. And it's like, none of that. It's the audience. What's the audience? How did they frame this, and how can you frame it so that it can resonate with them? So I think that's one element. And then there's the heart, which is just, this is exciting stuff. People want to be part of something cool. I heard a story of one company where they wanted to do a carbon removal offtake, and had spent best part of a year negotiating it, arranging it, getting it through all the internal systems. And then a new CSO came along and said, we're not doing that, and cancelled it. And everyone who worked on it was, in the sustainability team, they were all heartbroken. And then what happened was it got rescued by the unlikeliest source. Can you guess who rescued it in the company? I already said it's the unlikeliest source. The finance department. The finance department rescued it. And they rescued it because they'd already engaged with it. They'd done the numbers. They'd done they'd looked through it. They'd analysed it. So they understood it. But also they found it cool. They found it exciting. They'd met the founders. They wanted to be part of building this new thing. So it's like even finance people want the heart and the head. They want to know that it makes sense, but they also want something that's exciting and can be part of it. And if you just go with the facts and the figures and the head, that only works if you've got cast iron business case already out there, and we don't really have enough of that yet. If you just go with the heart, it's a lovely story. And that used to work when people cared about marketing and cared about this from a point of view of marketing and reputation and nothing else. But if you bring the two together, I think that's where we win enough to be able to get enough companies off the fence to be able to build this thing.
When it comes to this storytelling, another thing that came to my mind is the fact that you are, I think, by far like one of the best storytellers in the CDR space. That is just, the skill, and as you have explained already, this is something that you have had an interest in early on, and you have only been refining it. It shows in your TED Talk, which is great. Everyone should check it out. That's one part of it. And the second part that you have that is very unique is that you have worked with you have access to in your network to very many very high level people that typically removal advocates don't have access to. So you have the ears of the people who can actually make these important decisions, and you have the skill that is very hard to find, that you actually, I cannot imagine a better person to go and make the case for it. And with such skill set becomes, it's a big power, and with this comes big responsibility as well, I'm sure. So how do you think about it? Like, how does this, do you feel it, that what you yourself can potentially do through your networks, through the organizations you've built, it is much bigger than many of our peers, just because of the skills you have in the storytelling and communication and media, and because you have that access and the ear and the trust of those who are important.
Well, it's lovely for you to say all of that. And I think everybody's got something. You know, we need the methodologies, we need the infrastructure, we need the people who are building the machines and who are figuring out the new technologies, the new approaches. We need the people who are writing and designing the policies. We need all of this. It's not that this isn't just the one magic piece. So, you know, I do know that with that combination of storytelling and access, and by the way, you know, my colleagues, I get to work with the best people. It's astonishing. I kind of pinch myself every day that I get the incredible good luck to work with Marta and the team at CUR8. I seriously, and with Delia and with the gang at Rethinking Removals, brilliant people bringing in incredible skills to this whole space. And so it feels like a privilege to be able to contribute what I can to that. I really mean that. It's also exhausting and often terrifying and often extremely disheartening. I have to, there are times when, you know, I have to tell myself why it's so hard. And every time you think you've found a way through, it gets 10 times harder. So that's another consideration here. But it is you know, when I said before, I said this is the most exciting thing I've ever touched. And then if I'm really honest, it's not the kind of the save the world obligation, the contribute to saving the world obligation that really drives me in the end and really keeps me going. It's that this is so exciting. It's so interesting. Building this thing out of nothing. I've never been at the beginning of a $1 trillion industry before, right at the very heart of it, seeing how it happens and contributing into it and seeing the changes under my hands. And many of the companies that we work with, you know, that's what engages them too. People want to be part of building something. And I'd also say there's one other element to bring in here, which is we're at CUR8, we're building products using AI. So using AI, using large language models, how to manipulate data, how to speed things up, how to make things more accurate, how to predict risk better. And because of that, I've been engaging in this AI revolution in a way that I otherwise wouldn't have. And the interface between AI and carbon removals and how to make it happen is also captivating. When I see what this brilliant team of engineers is producing, when I understand how it's working, and then I think about how we can apply that, it feels like an extraordinary time to be able to be alive and engaged in this. We have the AI revolution. You have all these brilliant carbon removals approaches. You have the challenge of how you actually get this into the world. And when I said to you, sometimes it seems impossibly hard, but most of the time I can smell it. We're that close to getting onto this exponential curve. I swear I can smell it. We are really, really close to building this. And then how exciting to be part of something that really will change the world.
Can I ask, Gabrielle, you're obviously an optimist, and I think most people working in the space need to be an optimist because otherwise it's hard to keep going.
Not an optimist. I am not an optimist.
But not an optimist. After everything you've just said.
I didn't see this coming.
Okay.
You were going to say, where does my optimism come from? The reason I would say I'm not an optimist is this. So as far as I can tell, if you're an optimist, you're born naturally sunny. You kind of, you think good things are probably going to happen. If you're a pessimist, you might be born naturally gloomy and you think bad things are going to happen. But in neither case do you have agency. You're just making a bet on the future, but you can't change it. I would say I can't predict the future, but I can influence it. And so when I'm talking about all of this, I've no idea if this will work or not. I mean, judging by the headlines, we none of us, the things keep happening that none of us see coming, that change the whole landscape and change it again. But I do have faith in you, Sebastian, and you, Eva, and me, and my teams, and the incredible people I work with, and the incredible companies I work with, and the people out there who are finding the ways and finding the ways. I have faith that we collectively will find the way to make this work for the companies and work for the world and build this thing, regardless of the mad things that are happening around. So I think that's a very different place. It's not like, well, do I think it's going to work? Do I think it's not? No, I don't really occupy myself with that. I'm thinking, how do I engage and help the people around me to engage? How do I make you more successful? How do I make the companies I work with more successful so that we collectively make it happen regardless of the conditions.
One thing that I find that personally I struggle with, that takes away from my motivation very often, is to see the infighting, and the infighting especially in the climate space. And this is something that I definitely want to talk to you about, because you know the climate space infinitely better than I do, in its complexity, in all of it, right? Where's that coming from? Like, why do you think that even today in 2026, often the adversaries, the people who are roadblocking carbon removals at the policy level, at the company level, at the media narrative level, are often the people that are fighting the same fight?
So, I can tell you where it comes from. It comes from being human. So I remember once years ago, I was talking to the head of a very major NGO, not in the climate space, but a really major one, who said people think that my staff are all kind of more high-minded and kinder and nicer than everyone else, and they're not. You get the same spectrum in my organization as you do in any other of different kinds of people. And maybe the ones in my organization, he said, are a little bit more self-righteous, but basically we get the same mix. And they certainly have less money, but we get the same mix. So what I would say is humans have this wonderful characteristic of we want to build something together and feel part of something. And we also have this kind of defend our territory. You're trying to take something off from me, I will fight you. I learned to box years ago, and one of the first things that my boxing trainer said to me was, if you hit someone, they'll try and hit you back. Universally, it's a thing. And so if someone feels attacked, they will attack. And especially if it feels like a shrinking market, if you're saying, I want my project and not yours, then it just, that's what happens. And then on top of that, I think this kind of conviction that I'm right, I have to be right, I can't afford to be wrong in anything or allow any doubt, because everything is so hard already that if I allow any doubt into this, I can never make the thing I'm trying to make happen, I think is really damaging. There's a beautiful poem written by a poet called Yehuda Amichai, which is called The Place Where We Are Right. And it goes like this: in the place where we are right, flowers will never bloom in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, like a plough, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. It's a beautiful poem which shows that in the place where we're right, it's hard and trampled and there's no life, there's no curiosity. But if you can let doubt creep in, then you get a whisper in the ruined house. And I, in a way...
So how do we do that in practice? Because I this was beautiful.
Here's how.
But like, how do we do this in practice? Because there's so many people.
Deep listening.
Yeah.
Make people feel heard. So they really know that you've listened to them, that you understand where they're coming from. Step 2, don't say my thing and not yours, but look for the ways in which my thing and yours have leverage, and if there are trade-offs, how they might be addressed. And step 3, keep on focusing on the outcome that you're collectively trying to achieve. If I genuinely believe that you're trying to make the same thing happen that I'm trying to make happen, then we might disagree about the route, but we're not going to fight in the way that we fight viscerally if I think you're trying to make something happen that I'm not. And so I think focusing on the outcome, deep listening, and allowing for space where there might be a both and are the most powerful ways to address this. And also, here's a ridiculous thing: hanging out with people, being curious about why they think the way they do, not trying to show them why they're wrong or tell them why they're wrong, and not trying to convince everyone, but being curious. Curiosity is a superpower. I swear it. If you're curious with people and you're hanging out with them, you're seeing them in person, it changes everything. People say, I had no idea that you thought, I had no idea that it would be like this. I want to, my colleague Delia, who's been working on the ISO standard, had been dealing with people fighting like crazy about the different aspects of carbon removals implacably on calls. And she would take them aside at meetings and she'd say, just tell me everything about how you're thinking about this. And, well, how about this then, or with this, but just tell me. And then she'd stick them together and then she'd have another call. And then she told me that one time she was going through an airport and she thought, I've got to go on this call because if I'm not there, everything will rubber band back to where it was before, and we'll lose all the progress we've made. And so she's running through the airport, she's on the call, and someone brings something up, and before she can say anything, the people she's been working with, who were the opponents before, go, "Oh no, we shouldn't do that because of this." They were defending it. She didn't even need to be there because they'd taken it on as theirs. Because they could see this common outcome, they could understand it, they felt part of it, they've been building it, and then they defended it. So that's the way. I was talking to someone the other day who kind of said, okay, so how do you do this? First of all, you get in there and you make them all like you, and then you sneak in the thing that you're actually trying to lobby for. And I go, you don't do that. You start from the beginning and say, here's what I'm doing in my completely transparently, and we're trying to make this thing happen. So, and people trust you if you're transparent as well. So, that's all I got. Most of my work with Rethinking Removals is doing this. And in fact, most of my work with CUR8, when I'm talking to policymakers or when I'm talking to business leaders, it's like, what do you need? And how can this fit with what you need? And when they start to take it on and say, I want to build this, then it happens. When it's mine, when it's theirs, when it's something tangible that they can really do.
It was a really good how-to blueprint in practice. That's great.
But it's so hard on social.
Don't do it on social media.
Right? Because
don't do it on social.
But
social
that's exactly
is not real life.
Wow, this is a strong statement coming from you and me, right? But it's the reality is the other two steps. I can see how they can all work in the digital world, but the deep listening is so hard online, right? And that's where I see a lot of this breakdown. Is that these interactions, I wish that they happened in a pub, that they happened on a lengthy call, but very often they happen in the comments.
That's super interesting.
Right?
Why do you think that? How does this fit with that? How interesting.
I just think it's...
So someone writes something, you don't say, this is why you're wrong. You say, how interesting. Why do you think that? And how does it fit?
That's what you mean.
The problem with social media is that because you're not looking at people in the eye, but people instinctively, if you hit them, they'll hit you back. Fundamental law of nature.
It's a challenge because it's much more easier to talk to people in person compared to, starting a comment thread, because that means that they have to go back there and check the comment and respond again. And, it's kind of async thing. And it's just not as real, as tangible as sitting down. So in the margins of some large conferences, if people show up.
But I think,
right? Those conferences
I think it's, I ask myself the question, am I trying to be right? Remember what I said about the place where we are right? Am I trying to be right? If I am, then I'm probably not going to get a useful or interesting conversation apart from just battering someone down.
So, Gabrielle, one thing I wanted to explore already in the very beginning when you brought up this deep listening without, having it in your mind to offer specific insights or just listening, and also like being willing to change your mind. I don't know if you put it so clearly, but I mean, I took it that that's kind of part of the exercise, right? Is there something, and it can be on climate or removals or something else, I can imagine you are an open-minded, you're a curious person, right? Curiosity is a superpower, as you just said. Have you changed your mind on something recently? What comes to mind?
I change my mind so much all the time, and it's brilliant. I suppose the first thing that came to mind is I changed my mind on AI, because I'm a writer. So it's like, don't get something else to write for you. This is just stealing human creativity and trying to reproduce it in a way that doesn't mean anything. All the data centers, it's whatever. This is terrible. And I still don't know whether this is going to bring an AI apocalypse, but I've got another apocalypse potential to avert. So I'm focusing on that one instead. There's only so many apocalypses you can work on. But I've become captivated. So it was really funny. I was always the one that grumbled about AI in CUR8 when my co-founder Marta was saying, we need to bring in this, we need to bring in that. And when I reluctantly and very grumpily said, well, I suppose I'll try it a bit, it's now become one of my favorite set of tools. And I'm exploring the power and understanding the power in really interesting ways. And now I kind of I feel like I'm understanding where humanity and human creativity fits with this extremely useful tool, rather than saying it has to be an all or nothing. So that was a very recent about the way that I talk about this. I think one other way was that I when I was framing carbon removals early on, it was all about and this is one I'm embarrassed to admit, so you'll be let's see if it gets broadcast or not. But when I was working with the climate champions, we were trying to put together a panel for talking about carbon removals at COP26 and on a big stage to make sure it actually had a proper presence there, because otherwise it wasn't going to be there. And the climate champions had this rule that there had to be a certain percentage of people from the global south. And I got really irritated. It's just like performative virtue signaling. Carbon removals isn't relevant to the global south, because it basically all of the really sensible projects that are actually going to happen are in the global north. Getting someone random from the global south just to talk about this, ridiculous, but that's their rule. I'm so embarrassed to say this, honestly. It sounds ludicrous to say now. I didn't know. I was just being stupid. And so I had a conversation with, looking for someone. I said, it can't be someone who's just there for the sake of being there. It's not just, this. We have to have someone who actually can say something meaningful. And I was pointed in the direction of a gentleman called James Mwangi in Nairobi, who had been starting to think about carbon removals and perhaps could say something useful. I recorded the call. I still got it, that first call I had with him. I just, at the end of it, I put down the phone and I can't actually express what I said, because it's not for family consumption. But I was so wrong. I was so completely and unbelievably wrong, because the James told me that he came to carbon removals in Kenya from jobs. What are the industries of the future that Kenya is going to be able to compete on, that this brilliant, young, dynamic, inventive population was going to be able to do? And then the Rift Valley is an incredible source of geological storage, and also, solar power and wind power and geothermal power, and then the capacity for what you could actually use this for and how. And I just, I switched overnight from realizing that carbon removals is an immense opportunity for economic development in the global south. And the global north is playing ridiculous slow catch up by comparison. So, I'm embarrassed that it took that for me to realize it. But since then, the number of incredible projects across South America, across Africa, across Asia. So, yeah, really badly wrong. And I will never, ever make that mistake again. And I work really closely with James, who's brilliant now. He's a good partner.
Earlier this year, I published a paper with Oxford University
Really?
exactly on this topic: economic opportunity.
Well, honestly, I was in a
Yeah.
hurry. I was in a hurry. It's
very
just like, we just
passionate
need to
about
get
it.
this thing done. Why are they putting this constraint? And I could not have been more wrong. So I apologize. I will never do that again.
Gabriel, can I ask you one thing that I also think I haven't worked in climate very long. When I look at Eve, when I look at you especially, right?
I'm so old.
And one thing that I encounter,
I've been doing it a long time.
You have a very rich experience. And one thing that I personally often struggle with, and I think many people do, is the personal choices we take to kind of lead sustainable life, right? And so I'm wondering, how do you approach, because there's often this push for puritanism in climate, that like, if we work in climate, we cannot fly, we have to be all vegans, all that stuff, right? And I'm just curious, I've never asked you this, like, how do you approach this in your own life?
What I did with my place in London, so I did everything I could here. So I got an electric boiler. I got I get renewable electricity. I don't have a car. I walk or take public transport. Occasionally take cabs in London. And I do eat meat with enthusiasm, but I cut down on the amount of meat that I eat. And so I have my cups and my reducing the amount of waste that I generate and so on. and food waste. So I did all of those things. But I fly. I fly for work, I fly for adventure, and I fly for love. So I fly to go and see people who are in far-flung places who I love, and that's the only way I can see them. I fly for adventures, and I fly for work. And any one of those flights, or any few of those flights, wipe out all of the other things that I do. And I'm very aware of that, and I feel like I sit in this really uncomfortable place of, can I justify? Do I need to? I spoke to a friend of mine who's a climate activist who was on a plane, and somebody said to him, "Why should you be flying if you care about the climate?" And he said, "It's funny. I realized I was the only hypocrite on the plane because I was the only person on the plane that was trying to do something about climate. Everyone else was just flying." So I think, in a way, I feel like I sit in a place where lots of people do. And part of my job is not to be pure. My job is to try to change the system, to try to help to decarbonize aviation, to find the solutions where they exist, and to find carbon removals where they don't. And so, I think things like this cup, every time I use it, it reminds me. It makes a very tiny difference to my overall emissions, but it makes a material difference to reminding me this stuff matters. And so I think some of those small things, they might not make a big difference in emissions, but they make a difference to, like, this is tangible and this is real. But also, I think the purity point is a little bit like the place where we're right. I have many friends who are vegan, and actually I love vegan food. I also love vegetables. I love fruit. I love meat. I love fish. I'm very much an omnivore. And I kind of respect all of those positions, but none of us can live a life that's divorced from fossil fuels. We just can't. It's too embedded in our economy. So I remember once I went to this, I was speaking at an event where a famous restaurant critic, who I will not name, and a climate activist, who I will also not name, was speaking at an event at the Royal Institution, as was I. And it was sponsored by Shell. We all knew that it was sponsored by Shell. This was back in the day when we still did those kinds of things. And they'd agreed to go to the dinner afterwards, but then they decided afterwards that they were not going to go to the dinner. They were going to go off with their noses in the air because this was sponsored by Shell. And I thought at the time, I mean, it was a bit rude to the organisers who were at the Royal Institution. It wasn't Shell. But also, it's like, how did they get home? And when they got home, did they switch a light switch and expect the lights to come on? Did they maybe put the kettle on? What kind of clothes were they wearing? What kind of shoes were they wearing? And all of that has fossil fuels completely embedded. Now, is there absolutely their right not to want to support a fossil fuel company? Absolutely fine, I get that. But I kind of noticed at the time that there's one, I tried to give up plastics. Give up plastics for like a week and see if it's possible. And I realized that everything that I bought had plastics in its life before it met me. So I can't. So what I can do and I must do is use whatever skills I have, whatever relationships I have, and whatever networks I have to try to change the system sufficiently so we can all do that. So we can all, most of my life, I'm working on carbon removals now, but most of my life I've been working on reducing emissions, getting off fossil fuels. And I still support the brilliant work of my friend Sapora Berman, who is working on the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. How do we use the remaining ones that we've got and make sure that we don't proliferate? So I'm a very big supporter of her work on that. But I just don't think, however pure we try to get, we can't yet. And I often feel uncomfortable about it. I sit in this place of cognitive dissonance. I'm living this thing, but I'm trying to get to this thing. But we all are.
Like we all are.
We all are. And hopefully that makes me a bit more human when I'm trying to give this message.
I think so.
It's a question that's always challenging to answer whenever it comes up. You mentioned flying, and you've done quite a bit of work on aviation and CDR through CUR8. I just wanted to know, so what is the latest on this? Are we going to start seeing more uptake and support from the airlines?
I think it's interesting. CDR? So Airbus invited me to go to their summit last year, and I was the first person ever to talk about carbon removals at the summit. I was speaking on a panel about sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, but I was the one who said, "And now for something completely different." I sat last year on the Jet Zero Task Force for Carbon Removals, the Task and Finish group, and I'll do that again this year, which is advising the UK government on how to think about carbon removals. They don't have to take the advice, but at least they've set up this initiative. We worked with a sustainable aviation group this is CUR8 now, to purchase credits for an advanced market signal to show that bodies across the space of aviation, so not just airlines, but also airports, the equipment manufacturers and so on, everyone who's engaged in this is taking this seriously. So, I've also, spoken at Sustainable Skies and at Farnborough, and now I'm speaking to many different airlines about how to approach removal. So that's the kind of the aviation space. And one of the reasons for all of them is that they're right at the forefront. It's beginning to dawn on many airlines that what they were counting on, hydrogen planes, electric planes, they're harder than they look, and they're going to take longer than you'd think, and probably account for less than you'd think. So I think Boeing did this first, but others have followed as well, which is making kind of planners where you can put in different parameters and try to work out what different approaches for decarbonizing aviation there'll be. And there's of course travel less or have fewer flights, and then there's get your operations more better at the airports and in the air traffic control and so on, so you use less fuel. Then there's electric planes, there's hydrogen planes, alternative fuels, and then the sustainable aviation fuel, which is currently coming from biomass, but the aim is to get it to a place where it can come from eSAF, or take CO2 out of the atmosphere and turn that into an equivalent of the stuff that we're pulling up out of the ground. So it comes out of the air, goes back in the air in a clean loop. And then there's carbon removal for what you can't do the rest with. And I think there was a perception in aviation that carbon removal will be a tiny bit at the end once you've done everything else. And it's becoming increasingly clear SAF is harder to make, more expensive, harder to access. Hydrogen is going to take a long time, if at all. Electric planes might be for very small journeys, but not for bigger ones. And so it's beginning to dawn on more and more airlines that removals are going to be a material part of the solution. Sean Doyle at British Airways said that they think it's going to be 30% of their solution, which is why they wanted to start engaging. So since last April, when I spoke at this, I've heard more and more realization. It's starting to dawn on more airlines. There are some Airbus Ventures is actually an investor into CUR8. And Airbus was one of the early purchasers of carbon removals. And there's other airlines, KLM Air France that's bought some, EasyJet, some of the other players as well. Lufthansa's buying their so it's starting, but I think we haven't quite broken into the kind of realization that this is going to be very material. And there's a lot. I think there's in many of these airlines. There's a lot of people who put a lot of their effort into SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, who are kind of still focusing on that and saying, let's try and get this really properly going, and we'll worry about the removals later. And I think that's just starting to filter in. How does SAF and removals play together? It's very interesting that the UK government appears to be considering whether to bring removals into the SAF mandate. That was something that was recommended by the independent review and also by the Jet Zero Task Force. And I've heard that the European Union is thinking along similar lines. It's like, instead of putting them against each other, how can they work together? And there are ways in which SAF and removals do relate. So quite a few of the removals methods that generate a stream of CO2, like direct air capture it from the air, has a stream of CO2. Right now you can use it for removals, but in the future you could use it to make sustainable aviation fuel as well. So some of the airlines are thinking, if I invest in that now, I'm getting my removals built, and I'm also investing in infrastructure that will help me with my aviation fuel. So I'm trying to, all of my work in that now is a lot of my work in that is trying to look at how removals and SAF integrate, instead of it being first one and then the other. And I think that's the thing that will really help in the aviation space.
And I do feel that we need to get to a space where they where policy
It has
leads
to
the
be.
way
It has
and
to
not
be.
just individual airlines, right? Because at the moment
Yeah.
there is a SAF
Yeah.
mandate.
Yeah.
There's not a CDR and SAF mandate. And so I'm thinking until that changes, and you mentioned the UK is at least thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
Until that changes, I don't really see the option. And actually what I'm seeing in the CDR space, interestingly, is that DAX companies are converting into ESAF companies, right? Like, because they're seeing that the utilization pathway,
Yeah.
at least
Yeah.
there's a compliance market.
Yeah.
There is a market,
Yeah.
whereas for
Yeah.
CDR there isn't yet a compliance market, and so I'm
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
often seeing the opposite in the market happening, at least on
But
the supply
yeah,
side.
I think so. But ESAF is so expensive that to do that sort of material,
Yeah.
and aviation airlines operate at a very, very tight margin. So so then there's a whole question of how that works and how that gets passed on to customers and who pays. But I think yes, when we get the compliance, when we get the governments actually taking up the heavy lifting, then it will just go. But if we wait for that, it won't happen fast enough. So I think when I talk about this as a time of pre-compliance, actions that companies take now are very materially important in building the industry so that we actually have a fighting chance of getting to the scale that we need. But also, if you see that compliance is coming, getting access to the credits at a tractable price now instead of scrambling like everyone else does later when the prices have gone up is a sensible business decision too. So I think that those are some of the ways to think about it. But yes, if I were queen of the world, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd bring in policy tomorrow.
Kerosene prices now, I mean, just while we're sticking to aviation, right? What we're seeing in other industries is basically rising costs, rising prices, less desire to pay any type of carbon price, right? And now if we're looking at what's happening with airlines, I mean, I saw the news yesterday, Lufthansa canceled 20,000 flights, right? And this is going to be pretty bad in the next months, right? So how do you think that could impact
It's
everything
very
we've
hard
basically just
because
discussed?
everyone is seeing rising prices, reductions in discretionary spend. As long as this isn't mandated, why don't we wait? So, I feel sometimes that every time I turn around, the landscape has become 10 times harder. But I said I've been working on this for 30 years. I'm working on climate change for 30 years. And we've had headwinds before. And they don't necessarily go the direction that you expect. When the Ukraine war started, everybody expected that all companies would pull back from their climate commitments. And they didn't. They didn't. And I think they didn't for two reasons. There might have been short-term shifts, but they didn't pull back and they still haven't. Well, every company I'm talking to that has climate commitments or is leading in this is saying, we've got complete support from our leadership. We might get a few more questions about exactly how this works or what the benefits are or what it fits against our targets and our promises, but we're rock solid support almost across the board. There's one or two exceptions that are shamefully pulling back, but most are not. And with the Ukraine war, I thought a lot about why that was the case, and I gave talks about it because I think the Ukraine war happened, and in fact, same with COVID, but the Ukraine war happened after the financial services system had realized that climate change was a material financial risk. And until that point, it was kind of tree huggy. And after that point, it was material, it was business, it was economic, it was financial risk. And so it had already started being embedded in the structures of business. And that's what makes it stick. So one of the things that Melanie Nakagawa said is that if you're a big company, you notice that if the fundamentals haven't changed, then the winds of this geopolitical shift or that geopolitical shift don't change the underlying fundamentals. You still need to be engaging with it in the right way. And so, it's definitely harder. It's definitely a short-term blow. But we'll see. But I don't see this as being something that will materially change the direction, because the other thing is, I mean, it's kind of ironic. All the headlines are, of course, on the acute problem of inflation, of the Strait of Hormuz. So many instant experts in that, and not necessarily on the increased risk of tipping points, of the overturning of the circulation in the North Atlantic that could bring devastating temperature changes to Europe, or the droughts that sweep you across the US, or the wildfires that are in the other places, or I think one of the reasons that this made its way into the financial services sector is the realization of the direct risk to assets that come from the fires and floods and storms and droughts and so on. And that's quite dramatic. But there was also what's the underlying shift in policy and sentiment, and how are you exposed to that when you have stranded assets, the transition risks, and both of those are still real. So, I obviously wish that the world was taking climate more seriously and carbon removals more seriously. But if it were, this would not be worth my time, and I'd be doing something else.
That's well said. Sebastian, do you want to introduce more topics, or are we going to start slowly wrapping up?
Only a fun final question, but for me, we
then
can wrap up soon.
I'm gonna. I want to, because I want to also get closer to the end on the high notes. And you already mentioned some things, Gabrielle, that you think are going better than people might think. What is exciting you these days? What's exciting that you're working on, that you're seeing?
I feel like quite a lot of things are exciting me. One of the things is this incredible range of inventiveness from just all of these 2,500 companies, that the inventiveness and the technologies and the approaches and how these are embedded in different communities and different industrial processes. But just they're great stories, how they came up upon this, how they're trying it, how this fits. It's like watching smartphones come into existence and realizing they're going to change everything. In a previous life, I used to write about many things, including evolution, and for my first book, which was about a past geological timescale climate changes, I went to see this incredible range of fossils. So it's in Newfoundland. And it was a period just before the Cambrian explosion. So up to this point, all of Earthlings were basically just green slime and had been for billions of years. It's basically the Earth was covered with green slime. And then suddenly you started to get animals. You got multicelled animals. You got eyes and teeth and legs and shells and brains, and the whole thing went. And you got all of the incredible inventiveness that you have on Earth. And I went to visit this place in Newfoundland where the fossils were actually embedded on the rock. And the geologists, they took their shoes off, their boots off, to walk on the rock and look at the fossils. And it was so that they didn't damage the fossils with kind of stones that would be in the rocks. But it almost looked like Moses by the burning bush taking the shoes off, because it was such a holy place. Because this is the beginning of everything. So what's exciting is it feels like this is the Cambrian explosion of this whole incredible suite of solutions that we've been building. The hole's getting bigger and bigger, and now this suite of solutions that are going to fill it and buy us the time and enable us to get back to a place where we can actually solve this thing. So that's genuinely exciting. The other thing that's exciting is I'm working with all these brilliant young people who are bringing in things like AI skills and other ones, and who are creating infrastructure and the solutions to make this work, especially at CUR8. They could be doing anything for much more money anywhere. And they're doing it at CUR8 because they believe in this mission so fundamentally that they're pouring their hearts and souls into it, and it's incredibly exciting to be there while they're doing it, and to have that energy and to share that vision. So that's exciting. And then the other thing that I suppose is exciting is that it's the companies I work with, and seeing the people within them. There's always people within them who have that combination of heart and head, who could see the figures, who are the business leaders, but also who just engage with the world, get their fingers dirty in a way that is going to change everything. And so I get it's a bit like when I'm diving, I get the privilege to go into this other world and really experience it. I can experience the world of the AI engineers. I can experience the world of these incredible entrepreneurs building the solutions. And I can experience the world of these business leaders who are making this happen inside the companies with all the intricate politics that requires. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Okay. I'll
Okay, go
have
on.
just
Go on.
one final question to ask you, Gabrielle. What's your signature dish?
My signature dish for cooking? Or should I give you my signature cocktail?
You can give us both. Then we have a whole meal.
Signature dish. Oh, I love, I don't think I could even pick, it's like say, what's my favorite book or what's my favorite movie. I don't think I could pick of all the things that I love to cook. I just love to make more or less everything. I mean, the one thing that it was very annoying, I would always be asked, I love making desserts, and I make a chocolate mousse, which everybody loves, and it's really simple to make, and I make complicated desserts with lots of things. And people always say, bring the chocolate mousse. I do love it, but I do complicated things. But for the cocktails, we've started doing this now. When we do, we're doing a series of dinners with CUR8, and we have carbon removal flavored cocktails. So we have like a biocharoni. That's like a Negroni, but a biocharoni. What else do we have? We had I'm not allowed to have a favorite because I can't have a favorite approach. But my favorite cocktail is the Alcalina margarita. It's a spicy margarita, but it's the Alcalina margarita. So that's the alkaline stuff. Also daiquiri, a daiquiri. The direct take, actually, you see that.
That one I think I've heard
so
before,
of those,
actually.
the spicy margarita is definitely my favorite, with a little bit of a twist for the Alcalina margarita. Oh, with the chocolate,
and with the
mousse
chocolate
on
mousse on the side.
Come round to my house, I'll make you some.
We will. Gabrielle, this was a journey. Thank you for taking us with you.
Thanks for asking such wonderful questions.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks for asking wonderful questions.
Shared.
I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Bye, Gabrielle.
Bye-bye.